Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the YS Shadow, your home for obscure and the occasional blockbuster movie discussion and review. So today we got a real stinker of a fucking movie for you.
Wait, Derek, what killed the dinosaurs?
The Ice Age. So our movie today is of ice puds, and the reason why that is because we're reviewing Batman and Robin, the 1997 version with George Clooney, which features Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze. This movie is so bad. It killed the Tim Burton Batman franchise, and it almost killed the superhero movie franchise as a whole until they eventually had to reboot everything in the late 1990s, early 2000s.
Anyway, let's begin. Like the Superman movies of the 70s and 80s, the Tim Burton line of Batman movies were straying away from being serious to outright campy. By the time Joe Schumaker directed this movie, Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers was more concerned about the series generating income from merchandise and toys rather than relying on a good quality product.
Yeah, so this franchise is treated more like a live action toy commercial or cartoon than anything else. And Batman and Robin would be the nail in the coffin for the Batman movie franchise, all the way until we got the reboot with Christian Bale, Christopher Nolan, Batman Begins.
Yes. Well, much can be said about the production values and set design, but the franchise took a bizarre turn when nipples and codpieces were added to the batsuits. One factor that helped give this movie the reputation it earned. Showing close-ups of the actors who were in suiting up didn't help much either.
Yeah. Oh, God. So the nipples in the batsuit, unfortunately, started with Batman Forever, which is the movie that precedes this one. And then they just fucking went all in on it for some stupid reason. Which leads me to want to add on that George Clooney chose to portray Batman as gay. Like, really gay. So they really wanted to gay up the batsuit as much as possible. Now, of course, I'm just joking here, but the fact that, they really want to emphasize cod pieces and nipples and even rubber butts, it's a choice. And actually, there is an interview out there where George Clooney kind of alludes to, like, oh yeah, Batman's gay, like in a joking manner, as he's dismissing his work on this movie. Because pretty much everyone involved in the movie says it was terrible. But I digress.
Hold
on a second.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, stop talking over me, bitch.
Yeah.
All right. Now, had this movie been more of a serious movie, like the first two entries of the franchise, George Clooney could have been a really good Batman. I think he has the chops for it, but they stuck him in a live-action cartoon.
Okay. The cartoonish atmosphere of the film either worked or didn't work depending on who you looked at. Thurman absolutely nailed her take as Poison Ivy and perhaps best understood by what she was given. Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze was a complete loss. The Terminator is not a good actor by any stretch of the imagination, and he was given soon actually the circle of best dialogue in the movie, if you could call it that, and he still struggles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying anybody nailed their part in this movie. It's considered one of the worst movies of all time. But if you had to pick an MVP from this cast, I would have to pick Uma Thurman. I think she did her part the best, but it's not saying much. Now, I have more to add on about the Mr. Freeze character, but I'll add on near the end of the review here. But as you were saying, yeah, Arnold's addition to this cast didn't help anything other than try to get more butts and seats kind of deal. In fact, he was actually the highest paid person of the cast. And he had a contract stipulation that he could only be on set more than 12 hours at a time, which is limited as the makeup and all the prosthetics he had to wear took a good chunk of that time, right? And which also led to them reducing the screen time of his character, which I think was for the best. when you see the final product.
Yes, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger was not the only muscle-bound behemoth on the set of this movie. The movie had Bane in it, and boy, does he suck in this movie.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. You would think Bane they could do a good job with Bane in the live action. Christopher Nolan kind of did, depending on how you view the Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, this movie made him the bitch. Now, Bane famously, he made his first appearance in the Nightfall comic arc, which he actually breaks Batman's bat in that comic storyline, which at the time, DC was trying to kill off all the main characters. Like, you had the death of Superman with the Doomsday character, and then their version of that was having Bane, and it was basically a roided out communist jock from some like Caribbean, Spanish-speaking country, and he breaks Batman's back. And then the whole story arc is called Nightfall, which is actually a great story. But you fast forward now, and live media, like, they failed to really adapt that character well until Christopher Nolan got a hold of it. And that interpretation is kind of polarizing if you're like a purist, but that's a whole different discussion. Even in the animated versions, which to the Batman the Animated Series, it was meant to be a tie-in to this franchise, starting with the original Batman movie with Michael Keaton, but it just turned out to be an homage to it instead of a direct tie-in. Even they couldn't really figure out how to use Bane too well, kind of thing. Like, he was a hard one to piece in, and in a campy ass movie like this, just making Poison Ivy's bitch.
Well, much can be said about all that, but the overall story for this movie is by far the weakest of the four original Batman movies started by Tim Burton. Batman, Robin, and Batgirl had to stop Mr. Freeze from freezing Gotham City with space satellites, while Poison Ivy plots to rule the world. Meanwhile, Alfred, Batman's butler, is dying from a disease that Mr. Freeze was trying to cure before he became the villain that he is.
Yeah. So, Uma Thurman, again, I'd love everybody in this movie. She probably did the best job of her character, which is Poison Ivy. She's still, her performance is still brought down by the rubbish that is this movie. I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not a good movie. Now, unlike the Superman 4 Quest for Peace, which had a terrible production, it was cut corners everywhere. It was fucking amateur hour. This movie actually had a solid production. It's just piecing it together to make a good movie. Like, this movie works better as a giant toy commercial instead of actually a feature-length, good movie. That's where they went wrong, obviously, amongst other things. Whereas Superman 4 is considered one of the worst films because it's just a piece of shit. This is a piece of shit because they overdid it. I mean, this movie had a good quality budget, especially for that time period. It was just the priorities were all in the wrong place. And what you get is you get bad acting all around, right? Bad writing. Like, holy shit, do you get bad writing? And then, of course, studio interference from Warner Brothers, which, fast forward to the year 2025, and this still doesn't seem like Warner Brothers has figured out how to not interfere with fucking movie productions, right? And then this over-reliance, corporatizing, branding, and just over-merchandising, over-saturating everything. Everything had to have a corporate fucking merchandise tie into it. Like, a lot of the costumes were designed with the intent to make action figures, which, I mean, that makes sense, but for every goddamn thing, it's just, this movie is really just a live-action acid trip. And you just throw Batman on fucking rocket ice skates, and it completes the whole fucking, I guess, trip, for lack of a better word. And as I said earlier, the failure of this movie killed the Tim Burton Batman franchise, which started with the original Batman movie with Michael Keaton, followed by Batman Returns. And then Tim Burton stepped down as director for the third installment, which is Batman Forever, which brought us Joel Schumaker. And that one brought you all the campy zaniness. And then for this movie, they turned that up to 1,000. And it ultimately almost killed the Batman movie franchise. It set superhero movie, productions back a few years. Like, you wouldn't see any quality ones until like the X-Men and Spider-Man, because in those movies, believe it or not, learn from the failures of what not to do.
Well, anyway, while Batman and Robin was in production, Tim Burton was working on a Superman movie called Superman Lives, which would focus on Superman being killed and revived and fighting eventually a giant robotic spider. However, the failure of Batman and Robin killed Superman Lives. However, I've seen some production photos and videos of what could have been, and let's just say the failure of Batman and Robin was actually a blessing in disguise for Superman Lives, because it would have been ridiculed had it been released. Like, the costumes that Nicolas Cage tried out for, most of them don't look that great. Like, they, how on the Batman suits and starting with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin had to give them muscles and enhanced genitalia and butt regions. They were doing the same. They were going to do the same thing to Superman. But luckily they didn't do that. There was one cool thing about the movie that I wish had the movie got the green light. Green light would have been cool. They made a suit for Superman that had lines of lights going down up and down his body, because the suit was supposed to be like the one he wears to heal from his injuries and his near-death experience. And it's a shame we never got to see that on the big screen. But the same problems that were plaguing Batman and Robin were also at work here on Superman Lives. Kevin Smith, who directed Clerks and Mallrats, was the scriptwriter, or one of the scriptwriters for this movie. And he found himself in multiple meetings with executives, but didn't care about the dialogue, but care about more shit they could put in for toys and games. So again, as I said it before, it's best that Batman and Robin failed, so that Superman lives didn't live.
Yeah, I mean that sounded like that would have been a train wreck. So thank God. And then Batman remains a hot commodity for Warner Brothers. I mean, the DC superhero universe is an overall hot commodity, but especially like Batman and Superman. It seemed like in the early 2000s, Warner Brothers had learned from their mistakes. They got Christopher Nolan, and he created the Dark Knight trilogy, right? And that's a phenomenal movie, franchise. Batman Begins was a great movie. The Dark Knight is considered one of the... Many people still consider that the best comic book movie. And it's one of the greatest movies of all time, depending on who you ask. The Dark Knight Rises is still a great movie. Granted, I think that one's the weakest of the three. But, I mean, overall, it's a cohesive trilogy. And then they fucked it up when they tried to reboot Superman. You get the Man of Steel, which is a decent movie. And then from there, they really try to fuck up everything. You get Batman versus Superman, which is a mess. And then the Justice League movie, which I think everyone's aware of the fucking train wreck that was. So it seemed like they had learned a lesson and they went back to old habits, it seems. And now you got Matt Reeves at the helm of the Batman franchise with the Twilight kid, Chris Patterson, or whatever the fuck his name is. So, I mean, that first entry was decent. So we'll see where the sequel goes. But all in all, you know, Batman and Robin specifically, again, the 1997 version directed by Joel Schumacher with George Clooney, it's just an awful acid trip of a movie.
Oh, you said it right there, Derek. Anyway, the studios, the filmmakers, should use Batman and Robin as a warning and heed from it that they need to care for the audience before they focus on merchandising and toys, or otherwise we'll have another Batman and Robin on our hands, or maybe a movie that's even worse.
Now, something I was talking about earlier, because like they have Mr. Freeze as one of the villains of this movie, and I talked about how like the Batman the Animated Series was originally supposed to be a tie-in to the Tim Burton Batman, but instead it just became like an homage to it. But like in the animated series, right, they reworked Mr. Freeze's origin. Like he originally was just like a Captain Cold fucking jerk-off, rip-off kind of character. And then they reworked his origin to give him a really tragic backstory about his wife suffering from like an incurable disease that forced him to put her like in the like cryogenically freeze her until he could find a cure for it, kind of thing. You know, it's a sad story. And there's a great revamp for the character. And then they bring elements of that into this movie. So it's like the animated series is inspired by the original movie. And now the sequel to that movie is pulling shit from the animated series. Because like the whole concept of his wife being, frozen until he finds a cure, they still pull that into this.
Interesting.
It's just unfortunately, due to the really campy and acid nature of this fucking movie, I think such a backstory, it could be done convincingly with the tone. I just don't know how. And Schwarzenegger is not the right actor to pull off like an emotional character, like a character of that range of emotional depth and trauma. Even in a campy movie like this, Schwarzenegger's not the actor to pull that off. Yeah, he just doesn't have the range or the chops to do it. If they just brought Mr. Freeze in, the guy blasting people in ice and fucking saying fucking one-liners like "time to catch some ice," whatever. It just, he was misused. He was really miscast. Even though I think he actually tried decently. But all in all, this movie was terrible. Really terrible. Again, like what we said earlier, it's considered one of the worst movies ever made. And it's pretty damning because not too long after this came out, there was a movie that was part of the animated series, something called Batman and Mr. Freeze, that was released for direct to video. And many consider that the superior movie over this. So when you have your direct to video animated, you could call it a tie-in, even though it's its own separate story. When that's considered a far superior movie to your fucking $100 million production, that says everything right there. So, yeah. This movie set the Batman franchise back years. Years. Now, what is crazy is before, the studio, Warner Brothers, was fully aware of the disaster unfolding in front of them, they had signed Joel Schumaker to direct a 5th entry into the franchise. And it was going to be either called Batman Unchained or Batman Triumphant. And most of the cast of this was set to return. George Clooney would come back as Batman and all that fun shit. And then the Scarecrow was supposed to be the main villain of that one. And then he would hallucinate. He would get Batman scary hallucinations, you would see Jack Nicholson's Joker return. But of course, that got scrapped because this movie tanked. But the elements of that were retained for Batman Begins, whereas the Scarecrow is the villain of that. So there you go. Now, with all that out of the way, thank you all for tuning into our discussion, review, and rant about this movie, Batman and Robin. if you're a fan of superhero movies, the Batman franchise, it is worth watching at least once. No more. You're gonna have to wash your eyes out with bleach, just to get over the acid trip that you just seen, but still worth one watch. Other than that, avoid it. After that, forget you ever saw it. And thank you all for tuning in. Drop a like, subscribe, and follow. We always greatly appreciate it. Until the next time.